It started with the biggest pipe bomb the FBI had ever seen.
There is a bomb in Centennial Park. You have 30 minutes.
It ended in a dumpster after the largest manhunt in American history.
My knees knocked so hard that I was about to answer them. That's how nervous I was.
Eric Rudolph and the rise of anger.
Domestic terrorism has been metastasizing across the country for a long time now.
True story, true crime, true consequences for us all.
American Shrapnel, from award-winning journalists Becca Andrews and John Archibald, two-time winner of the Pulitzer Prize. Now available wherever you get your podcasts.
Witness the fight the boxing world has been waiting for on Netflix. Canelo Alvarez and Terrence Crawford face off for the first time in their legendary careers for the Super Middleweight Championship in Las Vegas. The winner will walk away the greatest of their era. Watch Canelo Alvarez versus Terrence Crawford Saturday, September 13th at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Live only on Netflix.
Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, 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 come on in.
Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. I'm Stephen Means. That's Stefan Krajisnik, and that is Andrew Gillis. Ohio State plays Ohio on Peacock at 7 o'clock on Saturday. This is your official game preview pod, also known as Let's Pick Apart Parker Navarro and find out how he might beat Ohio State, but also why Ohio State might tear him apart. Andrew, I looked up a bunch of stuff for this podcast. A lot of stuff. Some of it is about Ohio State against MAC schools, Ryan Day against MAC schools, and some of it is about Parker Navarro specifically. I just think he's JV Damon Williams. I mean, yeah, literally. I think he's JV Damon Williams. One of the first stats I found was, because I'm trying to figure out what type of runner he is, right? Is this a guy who's scrambling around and, you know, is playmaking that way, or are they having designed runs for this guy? And it's a lot more designed runs than maybe I anticipated it being when you look up some of his numbers. Last year, 1,046 yards, 743 of them came on designed runs, and 363 of them came on scrambles. 160 carries, 39 of them were scrambles. So the rest of that was Ohio using Parker Navarro as part of the rushing attack. And so, okay, what does that mean for this year so far? Okay, so far this year, he's had 27 carries and 11 scrambles. That's tied for fourth in the country amongst quarterbacks. You want to know who number one in the country is in scrambles going into week 3?
Scrambles? Oh, boy. I don't know.
You want to take a guess?
Is it Dylan Raiola?
It's Damon Williams Jr. from Washington with 12. I think they are the same quarterback. This year, 27 carries, 11 of them have been scrambles, 122 scramble yards, 68 yards on design runs for 180 yards. So they haven't used them as much in the run game so far this year. But I do wonder if this is something they pull out for this game against Ohio State to try to test Ohio State's run defense. And I think this is a heavy, heavy spy game, but I don't think it's a heavy sack game for Ohio State, because it's almost like what he wants you to do is come get me, and then I'm going to go make a play with my legs, because he doesn't even go through his reads. I've watched both the West Virginia and the Rutgers game. He's not going through reads. It's literally, if my first read's not open, I'm gone every single time. And so if you make him stay in that pocket and keep him contained, I'm not really I'm not going to say he has no impact, but a guy who has like 100% impact on Ohio's offense, I think you can limit that to 45% or lower if you just stay disciplined in your rush lanes and make him actually beat you from the pocket, because I don't think he has the ability to do that.
Yeah, I think the name of the game is discipline this week for Ohio State. I think I said this on one of our videos in terms of rush lane discipline. I think it's on field discipline. Defensive ends can't, Bo Atkinson can't beat Ohio's right tackle off the ball, because Bo Atkinson should beat Ohio's right tackle off the ball and go, ooh, I have a clear lane at Parker Navarro, and just abandon all responsibilities, and go just say, you know what, I'm going to pad the stat sheet against the Bobcats, against the MAC team, and I'm going to do what I want. Like, you can't do that because Parker Navarro will hurt you. I said in our score prediction, which I believe is up now on cleveland.com. If not, it'll be up before the game. The talent gap is just too much, but this is not a game that you can just, I don't think, sleepwalk through and win 70-0. You can sleepwalk through and probably win it, but you're not going to win it 70-0. So discipline on the field is important in rush lanes. Arvell Reese has to stay disciplined, or Sonny Styles has to stay disciplined in kind of tracking Parker Navarro. I think this is a little bit off the Parker Navarro point. I think that there's a mental discipline that goes into this week. I mean, you beat the number one team in the country, and then you come back against an FCS team, and we're kind of like, all right, well, let's see them open it up. And they smack Grambling State pretty much right from the kickoff. And you're like, okay, well, this game ends 70-0, and Ohio State's off and rolling. And now you got a MAC team. You're favored. I think the line is like 30.5 at this point. You've got a bye week next week. Then you start actual Big Ten play. Like, they've got to stay disciplined in terms of staying focused on that. So I think discipline, mental and physical, is probably the biggest point of emphasis for Ohio State and specifically Ohio State's defense this week. Because I'm not saying Parker Navarro is going to run out there and throw for 350 and run for 150 and Ohio is going to win. But Navarro will be able to get some first downs if you let him. He has done that in the past. You go back and look at his game logs, like, he's played decent teams and not really, been terrible. He was the best player on the field when when Ohio lost to Rutgers. So this kid can play, and they've got to stay disciplined against him.
Yeah, I second that. I think it's going to be a challenge. I think, the way Ryan Day talked about him on his radio show right before we started recording was, there's two ways in which his legs impact the game. One of them is, of course, buying time, escaping the pocket, things of that nature. But another part is just the way, Stephen, as you mentioned, the way they used him in design runs, and just, you're outnumbered in the box if Parker Navarro is a factor to run. So that adds a whole nother element to this. So not only is this going to be a test for, guys like Arvell and Sonny and Caleb as they kind of, look to contain him in their roles. And obviously with guys like Kenyatta and Caden Curry and Bo Atkinson, as well as Gillis alluded to there, I think it's also going to be a test for, the guys up the middle, right? The defensive tackles that we've talked so much about this offseason. I think this Ohio team in its entirety and its offense is going to challenge them. And Parker Navarro just adds another element to that. So it's not an easy task for Ohio State's defense, at least those up front.
For those looking for maybe a reference point of what they might be dealing with on Saturday, if you remember this Toledo game, another MAC opponent from 2022, Ohio State won that game 77-21. That was a Toledo team that won the MAC that year, and that I'll get into some of that later on. DeQuan Finn, I don't know if you guys remember him, but he was kind of running all over the place. And it was the first sign in 2022 with that team of, hey, running quarterbacks kind of give this team fits. And it never really went away after that game. Now, DeQuan Finn was a different type of athlete than I think Parker Navarro is, because the other side of that is DeQuan Finn ended up transferring somewhere else and starting after that game. I don't think Parker Navarro is going to be transferring somewhere else and playing after this season. Parker Navarro has also never played against the caliber of athlete he's going to be playing against on Saturday. So there's an element of he's a very good quarterback, and he does this. They're going to use him in the run game. He's their best runner. They have a running back who is also pretty quality, whose name is escaping me at the moment, but I think he's a good complement to what Parker Navarro is. C. Van Gora, yeah. He is a quality complementary piece that I think, especially in the MAC, will keep teams honest and off of Parker Navarro's butt and just selling out on him every single play. But I am wondering in the how dangerous is Parker Navarro conversation. He's a 10 if I'm Miami, Ohio, Akron, Central Michigan, Bowling Green. Everybody's a 10 for Kent State, so that's not even the same thing. You know what I'm saying? I think he was an 8 or 9 for West Virginia and Rutgers. He's like a 5 for Ohio State, especially if their solution is to do what they did with Arch Manning, even though Texas didn't run Arch nearly as much, and Ohio is going to run Parker all the time. If the solution is just throw Sonny Styles or Arvell Reese on him all game, especially in third passing situations, is this as much of a threat because of all those variables, Andrew, as maybe, I guess, just if you were just to simply describe what type of player Parker Navarro is he really that big of a threat to Ohio State?
Not really. I just think he's the biggest one, which I think is a difference, right?
Sure.
It's, there's there's levels of pain, right? And, okay, well, a flick on the knee is worse than, getting poked in the eye, but you can recover from both pretty easily, right? Like,
Sure.
I think you're okay, and I think the difference with like an Arch Manning type is like you actually had to game plan for somebody like Ryan Wingo. Like you mentioned it, like Ohio, like C. Bangura's got like an interesting story. He started at Ohio, he went to
Yeah.
Minnesota to try and make it at a Big Ten school. And I think as I kind of recall that happening,
It
I think he
backfired.
was going to try to be Darius Taylor's 1B, and it just never worked out. So he said, you know what? I'm going back to OU. And he's going to finish his career there. So, like, he's got an interesting thing, an interesting story. Their number one receiver is Chase Hendricks. Ohio has historically, especially since, like, I've been there, which began in 2014, they've got good offensive lines. Offensively, they're solid for a MAC team, right? There's not a, whoa, there's not even I don't even know if there's a Will Kazmarek here that you're looking at. I look at this unit and I see a really, really good team that is first or second to win the MAC in terms of odds, and they probably should win the MAC at this point. And they're one of the better teams in the G5. But if I'm Ohio State, I'm not looking at C. Bangura going, good God, we got to prepare for this guy, or Chase Hendricks, the number one receiver, going, man, we really got to make sure we have a double on him at all times. That's why I think Parker Navarro is interesting. One, he plays quarterback. And two, when you just kind of map out the rest of the team, there's really one guy that you kind of identify, and it's him.
He plays backyard football, Stefan, and he's got one weapon in the passing game. That's Chase Hendricks, who is replacing Coleman Owen as like the guy who's going to be 1,000-yard receiver this year. I think right now he has like 236 yards on 17 catches this year so far. That's top 10 in the country, and it leads the MAC right now through 2 weeks. Last year, Coleman Owen was in the role that Chase Hendricks was in, and he had 78 catches for 1,200 yards last year. So that's probably the world that Chase Hendricks is about to live in. So you take that weapon away, and you keep Parker Navarro honest in a world where Bangura's he's a solid running back. But again, he's there his role in their run game is when they're running designed runs, when they're running RPOs, you respect it enough that you at least have to honor it, and maybe it allows Parker Navarro to wiggle loose a little bit. But I'm not sure if that's the same threat to Ohio State the way it was, I think, before I started really deep diving into OU this weekend. So I guess the question for you then is, what do you want to see from Ohio State's defense? What can you learn about their defense going up against this opponent?
Yeah, well, I want to see. I mean, there's kind of an untapped thing with the defensive ends here, and I think this is a game where we can maybe see what they do when asked to maybe do something. Like, I think what made Jack Sawyer and JT so good was that when they were at their best, they weren't overcommitting to getting sacks. Right. They were really good rush defenders, and when you're someone like Kenyatta Jackson or Caden Curry who's waited your turn for so long, there can, I think, be a natural inkling of wanting to get sacks, wanting to get those numbers up and prove that you're the guy. And this is going to be a good game where they're going to be really tested of, okay, well, can you be disciplined at the same time while also trying to prove yourself? So for a guy like Kenyatta, for like guy like Caden Curry and Bo Atkinson, CJ Hicks, everyone that we're going to see factor into that rotation. I'm sure we probably even see Zion Grady in this game a bit. Like that's a test, right? And Logan George too. Like those are tests to see how disciplined they can be in those gaps and those run assignments. So I think I mentioned earlier the defensive tackles, the way they'll be tested. I think the defensive ends apply to that as well. So this whole defensive line, obviously the Texas game was an immense test for them, but last week was not so much. And when I look at their schedule and what's coming after the bye week, this is going to be a litmus test for where they are in preparation for playing Washington.
Can Chase Hendricks teach us anything about these corners, Gillis, that maybe, they had a great first showing, and then last week we were out there playing wide receiver against Ohio State, and that's with all due respect to Grambling. It's just, listen, we don't have to hide the fact that was a crazy talent disparity in that situation, but they handled
They're
Ryan
still more
Wingo.
talented than I am at playing receiver. I can guarantee that.
Listen, sometimes you just got to be irrationally confident. That's part of life, man, irrational confidence. We talk into a microphone every day. But we learned a little bit going up against Ryan Wingo, but that was still a young quarterback in an environment we've never seen before. This is the most experienced quarterback Ohio State's going to go against, and he has an experienced weapon, regardless of the talent disparity? Are there things we can learn about Jermaine Matthews and Davis Igbinosun, but then also on the interior too, what Ohio State wants to do in the slot? Because Chase Hendricks is going to spend a lot of time in the slot on Saturday. Or is there things that you think we can learn about this secondary this week with Chase Hendricks and the type of threat he can be?
I think the number one thing would be like if you want to experiment in the slot. Like I think we saw it a little bit, Jermaine Matthews in the slot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how does that look? I want to be clear that this is not, hey, he shut down Ohio, this guy should be playing the slot now because he did that. It's much more of an eye test thing, or, he didn't allow a catch, right? He didn't, he made 4 tackles in the slot and blah, blah, blah. It's not a statistical thing. It's, does he look comfortable? Like, how does he handle rotations? There are things that, I'm going to be honest with you guys, you two and the Buckeye Talk listeners, there are things that we're not going to pick up on that like only coaches can know of. He's got to split the distance at the apex and he was only half off for the slot receiver. He should have been a yard to the left when he was at this position, or, he was too tight to the line of scrimmage here, or he's angling the wrong way. So there are certain things that we're not going to be able to pick up on, but I think those are things that you can learn. Just how do you handle the basics of the situation? Are you comfortable? Do you look like you belong there? Do you look like you can move, whether that's Jermaine, whether that's Lorenzo, whether that's whoever? I do kind of like Lorenzo in that like safety-esque Jordan Hancock role. I think that is interesting to me. Steven, I think we talked about it. I think we were during the game. I think it was Scrambling State where we were like, just have him run downhill straight at somebody. And that should be his role. So like, there are things you can do there are things you can learn just kind of in comfortability. You look at the corners. I mean, Jermaine on the outside, he looks like a dude. Can he continue that? Can you dominate the teams you should? There were games where, like, I remember, to use another MAC versus SEC example, I'll go back to when I was in college. Ohio played Tennessee on the road, and that was a Tennessee team that was like top 15, and they had Josh Dobbs at quarterback, they had Alvin Kamara, they had Jalen Reeves-Maybin, Derek Barnett. Like, they had a good defense, and Ohio had a receiver named Sebastian Smith who cooked them, and they had a corner in the secondary, Tennessee did, whose name I forget, but like, he looked really good. I'm not even saying that. Can you just dominate the teams you're supposed to? Can you make the routine plays? Can you make the easy look easy? Those are the things you want to look for. Just comfortability, doing what you're supposed to do your job, and then making sure Davison keeps his hands in his pockets as he's trying to guard somebody.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big thing, right? As we kind of talk about Davison's development, I think, regardless of the level of competition, he can hold and get a pass interference call. And that's something we're going to watch all the time.
I think it's interesting with Jermaine because so far this season, he's played 79 of his snaps have come on the outside, 16 have come on in the slot. He played 10 in the slot against Texas, 6 in the slot against Scrambling because he played less snaps, obviously. He only played 26 snaps on the outside, and they played 32 snaps for the game. This is the first time Ohio State's playing an opponent whose best weapon is in the slot. And so is there an aspect of this of, do you want your best cover guy on the opponent's best wide receiver no matter what? Because I remember in 2019, they did this with Jeff Okudah. I believe it was the Penn State game where they put him, I think they had him in the slot a little bit covering KJ Hamler that game. They also had moved Damon Arnett in there for the Michigan game when Sean Wade didn't play against Michigan the following week. And so if you feel like you have versatility with these DBs, and it's not that Jermaine's the starting nickel. The starting nickel is going to be Lorenzo Styles. But last week gave you a chance to tinker everywhere. And it also seems it's very obvious they believe in Devin Sanchez and what he can be, even as a true freshman. And even I like what Aaron Scott showed us when he finally got his opportunity last week as well, right? And so if you still feel like you can tinker with some stuff, and you've got a guy who spends 95% of his snaps playing in the slot, and that's their best and only true receiving weapon. And if it feels like the game comes down to, if you take away Parker Navarro's primary kind of only weapon, okay, his first read's not there, he's going to take off, and then you contain him, and then all of a sudden, you can't really run offense at that point. So you're looking for, how do you shut this team down? Okay, Ohio State can use the same formula that a MAC team is going to watch film and come to the same conclusion of, this is how you use offense. The difference is Ohio State has guys who can win one-on-ones all over the place. I don't know if every MAC school has guys who can win one-on-ones all over the place. So to just simply say, hey, we're going to put Jermaine Matthews in the slot for 25 snaps, just keep the ball out of Chase Hendricks' hands and then make Parker Navarro beat you a different way, I don't think it's an absurd thing. And I think we might see it a little bit on Saturday. That's all I got for X's and O's. Anybody else want to add any X's and O's things before I get into the big picture? part of this?
I guess maybe not technically X's and O's, but I do a weekly thing on cleveland.com where I answer some texts that our texters send in 614-350-3315. And we got multiple about Bo Jackson and kind of his role with this team. And I just want to reiterate that I think all three of us believe Bo Jackson has the ability and explosiveness to be a big factor for this team this season, right? Immediately. And a lot of our texters, after watching him against Grambling State, saw that as well and think that, he can factor into the early rotation against Ohio, right? Not just second half when they're up by a big amount. Like, can he play, when it's 7-0 in the first quarter? Can he come in and get some reps? And I just want to reiterate what Ryan Day has been telling us. Like, I think they want Bo Jackson to do that as well, but it's clear that ball security is somewhat of a concern based on what they're seeing in practice and what we saw late in that Grambling State game. So he is a guy that I want to monitor this game because I think along with, showing his worth in terms of explosiveness, I think he's also probably trying to earn this coaching staff's trust. And I think that's another big thing to watch. So when you're watching Bo Jackson on Saturday, don't let yourself just kind of be you thinking ooh and ah about the explosive plays. Think about what the coaching staff is looking at in terms of where they could trust him in big moments. And I think that's a big thing for Bo Jackson and Ohio State's running game because they got to get the running game going a little bit, right? It has not been good. I'm not going as far as Andrew to say that they have to establish a run and they should never throw a pass until they have 50 rushing yards on the board. And he's smirking because he knows I'm being hyperbolic. But the running game is an important part of Ohio State's offense, and it has not been good enough the first 2 weeks. I think Ryan Day said that. Austin Saraville was saying that. Like they know that the running game has to be better, and Bo Jackson's part of that, and earning this coaching staff's trust is an important piece.
I'm really worried about Saturday's game. Not the winner and losing part of it, but they kind of went out of their way to establish the pass game last week.
Yeah.
Kind of. But I don't think it was we're going out of our way to establish the passing game because it's not like they threw it 40 times. They threw it 19 times. It's not Julian Sands' fault that Jeremiah Smith was wide open because there was a coverage bust on 2 of his throws. So they didn't air it out. It's just, in fact, he threw it less against Grambling than he did against Texas. It's just unlike the Texas game. Everybody caught the ball. And they're better than Grambling. So what would typically be a 12-yard gain turned into a 60-yard touchdown. So I hope that it doesn't feel like if the mindset was let's throw it around the yard, even if you only threw it 19 times, that this week you overcorrect and now you mentally go extreme the other way and it's let's run the ball 60 times. I agree, they got to figure out the run game. But the playoff taught us, how does Ohio State figure out its run game? You put that ball in the air and get that safety back there, and it's too high safety, and then you hand that bad boy off. And guess what happens? You win football games. You win a national title. I do think the Bo Jackson thing is interesting, though. And I don't know how much of – I don't think you are wrong, Stefan, with the ball security thing. The problem is I can hear in my head Dallin Hayden because this same thing, Andrew, was happening with Dallin Hayden, where it was every time we saw Dallin Hayden, he looked better than Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams in 2023. Part of the reason why is because Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson weren't 100% healthy, but he looked better. He ran it well. And it's, hey, where's he at? Hey, where is he at? Hey, he's trying to hold on to his red shirt. And then ball security became a thing. And so I don't know if Bo Jackson is fumbling all the time in practice or if he's just a true freshman who is trying to learn how to pass pro for the first time in his career, or if they're just not trying to hype him up too much and keep him humble, or it's just coach speak. Because I think they would have been talking about the ball security even if the ball didn't fly out of his hands out of bounds. Because I just think that's how this coaching staff talks. They talk about the quarterback situation, like take care of the ball, don't put the ball in harm's way. I mean, Julian Sands put the ball in harm's way once. And even that, we were all like, oh, you were just late on the throw. It's not because it felt like that was a character flaw or something that's an innate flaw in his game, right? So I can't figure it out. So here's my question to you. If Ohio State runs the ball 25 times in the first half, that's a lot of runs. Let me lower that. 25 times in one half is a lot of runs. Let's say they run it 20 times in the first half. Divvy out the carries to the top 3 guys.
I'll say 10 for James Peoples, 7 for CJ Donaldson. I think Bo Jackson gets 3 first half runs.
And is that because you think James Peoples needs it more?
Probably, yeah. I think CJ, it's you've been playing a lot of college football last few years. You don't need a ton of carries against Ohio.
Because I think you play Penn State and you play Michigan, that's the guy who's going to get the bulk of the carries because of what type of games those are.
Yeah.
So if that means he's getting the ball 5, 6, and 7 times in games where you know you're going to pick your score, I'm all the way with that. Andrew, divvy it out. 20 carries in the first half. How does it go?
If it's 20, which is a lot, probably at 6-4. And then that would be 10 for Donaldson. I do think you get him some work, and you just kind of get his cleats off and feet up as the game wears on and likely gets out of control. So I think Donaldson probably gets the early carries, and then you start mixing in James with that, and then as you get closer to halftime, maybe Bo gets a series or 2, and then that gets you to 4. You run 4 series where, it's CJ for the most part early, and then James starts to work in, and Bo towards the end of the half. I think you start the second half. I guess we'll find out with your game scores. But, maybe you start the second half where CJ's on the bench, Julian's playing in the second half, and James Peoples is the running back right behind him. So I think this is a game where you start with CJ Moore, and then James gets maybe the lead back role in that second half.
Vitamin Water Zero Sugar has great taste, zero BS, and obviously zero sugar. For those with zero room in their calendar, zero patience for slow walkers, those who get 0 hours of sleep on a Saturday night, have zero filter, zero given, and zero interest in grabbing a plain, boring water. Grab a delicious Vitamin Water Zero Sugar today.
This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Psst, healthcare pros, word's out, and it's too good to keep quiet. Look, LinkedIn is revolutionizing job hunting, making it possible to search by specialty, shift preference, and salary. Endless scrolling is out. Whether it's a mental health therapist or dental hygienist, finding the perfect role is faster and easier than ever. Head to linkedin.com/healthcare and start your search today.
Okay, here's my big picture thing. Do you guys think that this game is going to be competitive?
Depends what you mean by competitive. Do you mean competitive as in Ohio State has to try in the second half? It depends what you mean.
I just said the word competitive. That can mean whatever you want it to mean.
I think it's going to be competitive. And my definition of competitive, however, might be a little bit looser than your guys's. And maybe we're saying the same thing, just differently. Mm-hmm. I think my definition and the way that I would say this game's going to be competitive is, I think at halftime, we're probably 28-7, something like that, maybe 21-7 or 21-9. I think this is a game where Ohio State isn't saying, hey, Julian, sit down for the rest of the game at halftime. I think Julian's going to play into the third quarter. I don't think this is a, let's put Keenholz in to start the third quarter. I don't think that's what's going to happen. I don't think this is a situation to where you can say Brandon Inniss, Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, all of you are on the bench. Maybe JJ, if it's 28-7, you can give him a series and say, hey, if we score here, you're good. Certain things like that. So, yeah, I think playing actual starters into the second half would indicate to me that it's a competitive game. I'm using that relatively. If it's 28-7 against Texas, we're saying that was not a competitive game. Ohio State dominated them. So I think you have to look at it in the lens of Ohio State's playing a MAC team. Ohio State is playing a team that is woefully overmatched at every single position, 1 through 22, and then 23 through 85. I think looking at this through that lens, yeah, I think Ohio is competitive.
I don't think it's going to be competitive. I think the score might be closer than the Grambling, but that might just be a result of the way these two offenses decide to approach the game. I think when we look at number of drives and number of points, I don't think it's going to be competitive.
I think Ryan Day hates the MAC. Playing MAC games matters, right? There's 60% of Ohio's roster is guys who went to high school in Ohio State, in the state of Ohio. So obviously they probably grew up dreaming of one day playing a football game in Ohio Stadium. Now they obviously probably thought that they would be on the home team side of things, but here they are, they get an opportunity. So I'm trying to take into account that, right? The stargazingness of it all. They're like, man, I'm finally getting a chance to play here. But I'm also taking into account that I think Ryan Day hates the MAC. And let me tell you why. Ohio State has played 25 MAC schools since Jim Tressel showed up in 2021. Jim Tressel played 13 of them. Luke Fickell, as the interim coach in 2011, played 2 of them. Urban Meyer played 5 of them during his career, and Ryan Day has also played 5 of them. This will be his 6th time. He would have 2 more on that list in 2020 because they scheduled to play Buffalo and Bowling Green that year, but COVID kind of canceled a lot of that. There were no non-conference games. They only played the conference schedule. So this is going to be a 6th time. Jim Tressel, in his 13 times against the MAC, he played against a MAC school at least once every single year he was the head coach. And in 2006 and 2007 and 2010, he played 2 MAC schools that year because that was before the Big Ten went to 9 conference games, extra non-conference game. And he was throwing the MAC bone a lot. Combined score total of 499 to 148. And in the midst of some of those MAC schools, some notable ones, in 2003, they played a Bowling Green team who won the MAC West. They didn't win the MAC, but they won the MAC West. And then 2005, they beat Miami of Ohio, who won the MAC East. They beat Bowling Green in 03, 24-17, so a competitive football game. And they beat Miami of Ohio in 2005, 34-14. So at some point in that game, that was probably competitive, right? They also played Toledo in 2009 on a neutral field, and that was a shutout, 38-0. Why are you playing MAC schools on a neutral field? Average score through 13 games, 38.4 to 11.4 was the average score. So it's a win margin of 27. Yeah, there's some competitive games, right? Some games where there were some blowouts, but also some games where you're like, man, okay, the MAC. Look at the MAC. Look at the MAC looking Ohio State in the eye. Luke Fickell, for what it's worth, in that year, he beat Akron 42-0 and beat Toledo 27-22. So one competitive one against a Toledo team who finished first in the MAC West, and then one game where he just drummed Akron. So a total of 69-22. It's an average score of 34.5 to 11. Win margin of 23.5. So on par with his predecessor, Jim Tressel. And then Urban Meyer shows up. Ohio guy still, so he probably has a little bit of love for the MAC, right? Coached at a MAC school, there's some respect, but he's also upping the recruiting talent that's at Ohio State right now. It's a more nationally recruiting brand at Ohio State because of Urban Meyer. 5 games from 2012 to 2016, never played a MAC school twice in the same year, and then no game in 17 and 18. 259-53 is how he outscored the MAC. Average score of 51.8 to 10.6, so a win margin of 41.2. The only MAC school to score more than 13 points was Buffalo in 2013 when they scored 40-20. And you want to know who was on that Buffalo team? On their defense?
Khalil Mack.
Yes, sir. Who was somehow the best player in that game. And now
that got him drafted that game in the
first.
That
got him drafted, and now he might be a Hall of Famer. That's crazy. So 41.2. So that win margin skyrocketed up. But it's still kind of like, okay, you're beating up on bad MAC schools because Northern Illinois in 2015 is the only really quality MAC school he played. They won the MAC West that year, which brings us to Ryan Day and why I think he hates the MAC. Not really, but so his first ever MAC opponent was Miami of Ohio in 2019. They won the MAC. So the best team in the Mid-American Conference came to Ohio Stadium, and they had a lead at one point. They took a field goal, and then they got Justin Fields on a safety on a sack because J.K. Dobbins missed a block, and so they were up 0-5. And then they got outscored 76 points the rest of the day and lost 76-5. So the best team in the MAC in 2019 got drummed by 71. As I mentioned, in 2020, those 2 games got canceled, Buffalo and Bowling Green. So the next game is against Akron in 2021 without his starting quarterback, C.J. Stroud, who's dealing with a shoulder injury. So you throw Kyle McCord in there as the backup and a true freshman in his first start ever. And this is his 3rd game ever of college football. Fourth game because they had played 3 games before that. And they win that game 59-7. So more points for the MAC, less points for Ohio State, but also backup quarterback. If CJ would have been playing that day, I think you had another, 10 points to that. So it might be 69-7. In 2022, CJ's back on the field. This is the first time since that Buffalo game that a MAC team has reached over 20 points. It's also the only time that a MAC team during the Ryan Day era has scored more than 1 touchdown against Ohio State. And that's the game with Finn, 77-21. Toledo also won the MAC that year. So the two best MAC teams he's played, he dropped 70 on them. He hates the MAC. Doesn't have one in 2023. Plays Akron again as the season opener in 2024, where they beat Akron 52-6, and then they follow that up the next week with Western Michigan at night, 56-0. So that's 320-39. Ohio State could have not scored in 4 of the 5 games they played in the Ryan Day era against the MAC, and they still would have beaten the MAC by at least 14 points. 64-8 is the average margin in the Ryan Day era, with a win margin of 56.2 against the MAC. In a world where he's also played 2 teams who won that conference, we think Ohio might win the MAC this year. In fact, had they beaten Rutgers, would it be fair to say that they were amongst the favorites alongside of USF to potentially be the G5 team who makes the playoff? Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the other 2 times Ohio State's played a team from the MAC with this description, they dropped 70 on them. So why would they not do that this time around? Outside of the clock rules being a little bit different.
We'll get into my score prediction, but I think clock rules and the way they run their offense might be the only reason they don't get to 70.
Do you think Ohio isn't going to come out as aggressive against Ohio State the way that they have against Rutgers and West Virginia?
I imagine that they will. I would really hope so. I mean, what do you have to lose? Go up 3-0 and take the picture in front of the scoreboard, Lee Corso style.
I would 100% do that. Andrew, do you think we see a similar game plan for Ohio that we saw in their last 2 games against Power 4 opponents? Or is this a bit of a, maybe you got to take a different approach? Because there is, even though you've played 2 Power 4 opponents, those 2 Power 4 opponents probably have more in common with you than they do with the team you're going to play this weekend, with all due respect.
In terms of Ohio State's game plan?
No, Ohio.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm Ohio, I'm coming out slinging it. I mean, what do you have to lose? You know, like I'm coming out with trick plays in the book, and I'm coming out with every unique package you can throw out.
Let me ask a question to you then, since you know more about OU than I do. Like when we say Ohio comes out, throwing punches and things of that nature, does that still mean like relying on the run game a good bit? Because I think oftentimes we hear like, oh, they came out and they were conservative because they just ran the ball, they didn't throw a punch. Well, what if their best punch is something in the run game?
Yeah, that's totally fair. I think their best punch is going to be quick, like 1-2. If the first and second read's not there for Navarro, get the hell out of the pocket. I think that's their best punch. You like a lot of RPO type stuff. If you keep completions in front, if you keep things kind of going just 4 or 5 yards at a time, I think that's probably their idea. And then, I was telling somebody the other day, I was like, if I'm Ohio, man, like I'm coming in here and I'm like double reverse flea flicker. Why not? Like you just won one of the bigger games in recent memory in program history. They play Gardner Webb next week. They're going to go into conference play 2-2 with 8 conference games. Like you've kind of got nothing to lose. So I think they might try some unique stuff, but I just wanted to go back to Steven's point real quick. I was looking this up as he was talking. There is a database where you can look up betting stats where it can tell you, hey, here's what's been expected. And Ryan Day, in his time, I believe this is correct, has played 5 MAC teams. Miami of Ohio, Akron, Toledo, Akron, and Western Michigan. Those teams have scored 5, 7, 21, 6, and 0 points. Ohio in 2019 against Miami when they won 76-5, they were 38.5 point favorites. They very easily smashed that. 2021, they were 48.5 point favorites against Akron. They very easily beat that. Well, maybe not very easily. They won by 52. The next year, they played Toledo. They won 77-21. They were 31 point favorites. Next year, Akron, they did not cover the spread. They won 52-6. They were 48.5 point favorites. That was the season opening game. Akron led 3-0 in that game, which is one of my more fun facts of the season. That like Akron at one point during Ohio State's national championship run was winning at Ohio Stadium. They kicked a field goal to go up 3-0. And then the next week they played Western Michigan. They won 56-0. That was utter domination. That was maybe from start to finish, even considering the opponent, one of the most dominant games I've seen Ohio State play in my 2+ years on the beat. They were 37 point favorites. So what does that tell us? Ohio State has not covered the spread one time, and that spread was 48.5, and they won that game by 46 points. So Ryan Day is not exactly, and by the way, they went over in every single one of those games except for that Akron game,
Yeah.
which it was 66. The total, or the total was 66. The line was 66.5. Ohio State scores points against MAC teams
because he hates the MAC.
Ryan Day and the spread. What's up?
Because he hates the MAC.
Well, that's the headline of the podcast. Why Ryan Day hates the MAC.
Yes.
Game prediction. Well, I was going to say, you look at it as to expectations. They beat expectations when they play MAC schools.
My question, because they listen, I'm here to make this interesting because I don't think any of us have Ohio State shutting out Ohio. Is that correct? And we'll get into our game scores after the break, but none of us have him up. Okay. Miami scored 5 points in the first half, and they didn't score for the rest of the game. When they played Akron in 2021, Akron scored in the first quarter, and they didn't score for the rest of the game. When they played Toledo in 2022, Toledo scored once in the first quarter, the second quarter, and the third quarter, with a quarterback who I think kind of is a better athlete than Parker, but in terms of their play style, it's sort of similar. So Toledo scored a little bit more on Jim Knowles' defense. When they played Akron again, you mentioned 2-6, they scored a field goal in the first quarter and they scored a field goal in the third quarter. And then Western Michigan did not score. The question I'm asking in this instance is, the reason I said how competitive is this is because those are more of a, you either scored on script, Ohio State made a mistake, and you got a chance to benefit from it in the safety situation. You had a quarterback who's a little crazy, right, and could do some things out of structure, almost wanted to get out of structure. And at that point, Stefan, you mentioned how disciplined Jack and JT were. Jack, JT, and Zach Harrison at the time were not as disciplined in 2022, which is why DeQuan Fenton was able to do what he was able to do, because they weren't as disciplined. Even last year during the season, we were talking about that up until we weren't talking about how sometimes they would kind of get a little chaotic with their rushes. So it's either you score early when you had your script and you're in your essentially what you just spent the last 7 days of your life game planning to do. Ohio State makes a mistake. You got a pretty awesome dude at quarterback who probably should be at a better program than a MAC school, or you don't score at all. None of them score late, because that's what I was looking for. I was looking for, okay, how does all of a sudden Ohio score 14 points in this game? Okay, they score once against the ones, and then maybe they backdoor a touchdown near the end of the game when you're going up against the twos, and maybe a guy who is not a starter, a true freshman, makes a mistake that a starter wouldn't have made, and so Ohio gets a touchdown. But that's not been the case. It's always early. So if you had to map out, and we'll get into our actual scores after the break, but Stefan, if you had to map out what quarter Ohio's points come in, map out their game for me. Like, what do you think this is going to look like on Saturday in terms of when Ohio finds success against Ohio State? Is it early against the starters, where it's something that if you're Ohio's coaching staff, you take that and you use it as positive film for the rest of the season? Or is it late in the game where Ohio State's using it in their film room as teaching tape for young guys who are not starters?
I think it's early. I think it's maybe similar to Akron last year, where they come out and it's a good opening drive or something along those lines. You get a field goal or a touchdown. I think one thing that Ryan Day's done well, and this kind of goes to kind of like a culture conversation, but I think one thing Ryan Day has done well of, like, the guys that come in when it's 50-0 have a lot to play for. I think Bo Jackson is probably the guy that we keep using as the poster child for that throughout this week. I will say I do feel bad for Bo Jackson. He made one mistake, and it has become the biggest talking point, after a 70-0 win against Grambling State. So someone's got to be the talking point. But I think that they've implemented such a culture where the twos and the threes are playing for so much, regardless of the score, that it becomes difficult for these other teams to go in and get a late score, because, I don't know, Episatanale is pretty talented and he's playing for a lot, and he could be maybe not, I don't know if he'd be a starter, but he could definitely compete for a starting job at Ohio. Like a guy like CJ Higgs coming in. I mean, that's a former 5-star who's playing for a lot if he's getting second half snaps. Zion Grady, Riley Pettijohn, things like that. These are all guys who can compete for starting jobs, against the schools they're playing against. And they got a lot to play for. Those reps count a lot for them in the second half, which makes it, it's not any easier to score in the second half on these guys.
Riley Pettijohn was the defensive player of the game because of what he did in the second half against Grambling. To your point, I mean, and also to take a little bit of heat out of it, but Bo Jackson had become a bigger conversation for something that wasn't even a turnover. Meanwhile, the Ohio State starting quarterback actually did have a turnover in the game, and we've talked about it for like 5 minutes this week.
It also specifically does not help that the mistake happened at the end of the game when the reporters are allowed back on the field and all the reporters are standing there.
And we saw Carlos Loughlin snatch him up, which is why I don't want to paint it. Maybe it is a Bo Jackson thing. Maybe he's been struggling with it in practice, right? We don't know that because we're not at practice at this point. Or maybe that was an opportunity to use Bo Jackson as a way to coach the room of, I don't care who it is. I don't care what the score is. I don't care that we didn't even get a turnover off of it because it went out of bounds. Do not fumble my loaf of bread. And I'm with that.
And then you will run a mile.
Yeah, and then you will. Yeah, I'm with that. I'm with that culture building. I'm with that because it's not about you fumbled against Grambling, who you were already up by 63 points and it didn't matter. No. If you're going to fumble against Grambling, you're going to fumble against Penn State. You're going to fumble in a playoff game. I'm all for doing things that are about making sure that the standard continues to stay the standard. And unfortunately, Bo Jackson has to be the face of that right now. Because even with Julian saying, I think Ryan got asked after the game on Saturday about, hey, would you rather that interception happen in this game where it can be a learning opportunity? And Ryan agreed, yeah, sure, it's a learning opportunity. I'd still rather you not have to learn by throwing interceptions because possessions are valuable, but I'm with it. But yeah, Andrew, same question to you. When do Ohio's points come?
I think we can get into our score prediction. I think we're probably getting there right now.
Do not give your score position.
No, I'm not going to give it right now, but I think we're coming up to it. I know how this works. I've been around the block enough. I would say first and fourth quarter. I do think, we have seen teams move the ball a little bit on script against Ohio State. Even, I know they had Jim Knowles and that was a question of, last year and the year before. And hey, they played Youngstown State and Youngstown State scored a touchdown on them. And, it felt like at the beginning of the game, it was just like almost like sometimes you were conceding points or conceding a drive. And after that, the defense kind of locked in. So I do think Ohio scores early. And then I think Ohio probably gets one late too, not just because it's garbage time, they've given up. I just think, you're going to have a team that is, again, one of the better G5 teams. I think that might be maybe something else that, Steven's 100% right to say, look at the walloping that Toledo had in 2022 and they won the MAC. And, look at the, smackdown that Miami took in 2019 and they won the MAC. I don't know if you really considered either Toledo or Miami in those years one of the better G5 teams. I think this year you probably may consider Ohio one of the better G5 teams. Not saying they're the best or whatever, but I think if you were to have a conversation about it, I think you're probably talking South Florida. I'm still not ready to write Boise off. I mean, they've just historically done it. So we'll see. Navy's going to be really good this year. I predicted them in our preview show to be, or our season preview show to be a playoff team out of the G5. So, there are teams there, but Ohio's up towards that list. And I think they might be more towards that list than other MAC teams have been. So I think Ohio's going to keep coming. And I think you're going to see an early one and then a late one. An early one to kind of make people go, oh, Ohio State is going to have Julian saying take snaps in the second half. He's not just going to be wearing slides and a baseball hat from the opening kickoff of the second half. I think Ohio is good enough for that. So I think early and I think late.
To validate your point a little bit, Toledo went 9-5. Overall, so that was a year where the MAC was a bloodbath. They went 5-3 in the MAC, and then in 2019, Miami, Ohio went 8-6 overall and 6-2 in the MAC. So there is some validity there. There's also an element here of, I think, attention being paid to teams like Ohio because we've expanded the playoff and the G5 can actually be a part of this. You don't have to do what Cincinnati did to be a part of that conversation now. So that's playing a role in this as well. Last thing before we take our break, because it's going to help me make my point. Is special teams a negative right now, or is it just not a positive?
I think right now it's a negative.
As in it's going to cost Ohio State something.
As in it could cost Ohio State something.
Okay.
I think if Arch Manning puts one better drive together or one more good drive together and Ohio State loses 15-14, I think we're looking at the punt return game. He's going, why was field position? Why was Ohio State's average starting field position like the 20-yard line, 20 yards worse than Texas's?
I agree.
Ohio State had 2 drives start within its own 5. You're not scoring on those drives against that Texas defense.
No,
that could cost them the game.
Not without a random explosive play. No, you're not.
Right. Right.
The field position thing is valid. I'm also thinking about just random dumb things that can happen when you don't just field the punt. And when you're letting it bounce like that.
It happened against Grambling State.
It happened against but also it happened, Andrew, you remember this. This happened against Penn State in 2023, where they're letting it bounce and it accidentally hit Lorenzo Styles. And now it's live and Penn State got the ball. After Ohio, and this is after, by the way, Ohio State, who had Penn State pinned inside its own 10-yard line, got a stop and got off the field and gave Ohio State's offense prime field position. But because they didn't field the punt, it hit an Ohio State player, and now it's live and Penn State's got the ball. It's as if Penn State just had an explosive 40-yard play. So I'm with you. The field position stuff. It's going because when you get matchup games, field position does become a thing.
I think the field position stuff, like there wasn't that Lorenzo Styles type play against Michigan last year. There were multiple punts where Ohio State got way worse field position, and I think it's a huge reason why they lost the game against Michigan.
Well, and say like, forget matchup games. I mean, what if you go to the game against Ohio and it's 21-0 at the end of the first half, and Ohio is punting with 1 minute and 10 seconds left, and they're punting at the 40 of their own, and the ball bounces an extra 15 yards from the 21 to the 6.
Yeah, I think they might try it.
Then it's different, and then it's like okay, you lost 15 yards, and hey, you're backed up in your own territory. Your game plan, you want to go score, you want to be aggressive, you want to do all these great things. Okay, well, you're not calling the same plays at your 6 as you are as the 21, and you got to be a little more careful getting out of there, and it costs you more time. And then instead of maybe 28-0, it's 24-0. While that might not matter against Ohio, it does mean that you maybe didn't get in the end zone when you could have.
I think they trust Julian's arm a little bit more because while that did happen against Penn State in 23, Kyle McCord also had a play in that Michigan game in 2023 where he launched a 50-yarder towards Marvin Harrison Jr. But like some of this is like, what's your quarterback, right? Do you think your quarterback can push it down the field like that? And I think Julian can do that. My point is, I'm with you, Steph. I'm with you. The field position stuff is going to matter in matchup games. But for how it pertains to Saturday's game is why I brought up you let the ball bounce and accidentally hit one of your players, and now the defense has to come right back on the field after they thought they got to stop. What if Ohio gets a point easy score off of that? Like they steal a possession off of something like that because you didn't just go field it, you let it bounce. Oops, it accidentally hit a gunner. And now Ohio's got the ball at Ohio State's 35-yard line. And all of a sudden, they figured out a way to get out. Like they got a touchdown out of it. That wouldn't have happened if you'd have just gone up there and freaking fielded the punt. I'm thinking for this game, I'm thinking about it like that. Yep. Long term, I am thinking about it in a world of Julian Sand has to start a drive inside the 7-yard line because you didn't just field it. Because to be honest with you, that's happened the last 2 times they're going to Ann Arbor. It happened in 2023 to Kyle McCord. It happened to C.J. Stroud. His first drive against Michigan was inside his own 20-yard line because they didn't just field it correctly. So the special teams is a problem. How can it be a problem against Ohio? Ohio has to steal possessions, and that might be a way they steal a possession because when you don't do things correctly, when you don't play clean, you let random weird stuff happen. You open yourself up to that. So it's something to keep an eye on. The defense and special teams, I think, have more of my attention this week than the offense right now. And I get it, the run game is the run game, but I think the physical gap between Ohio State and Ohio, if we get to the end of the game, it's like, all the running backs are averaging 7.5 yards per carry. It's like, okay, well, I don't know if I learned that much. I think how the defense handles a scrambling quarterback and then also can the special teams get its act together, I think are priorities number 1 and number 2 for me.
Yeah, I hope Ohio has one drive where they can stop Ohio State and force them to kick a field goal too. Maybe a longer one because we've heard in the offseason all the things that Jaden Fielding has worked on. I'd like to see him kick a field goal at some point here.
Yeah, because they haven't really been in that situation, and I think they would have been in that situation against Texas. It's just Julian Sand found Carnell 40 yards down the field for a touchdown. Okay, that's the game preview pod. We're gonna take a break and then we're gonna give our game score predictions here on Buckeye Talk.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
It's round 3 of game predictions for Ohio State as they play Ohio on Peacock. Night game inside the shoe. It's not the primetime marquee matchup that you want, but it is at least a primetime matchup. It's been so long since we've covered a primetime matchup at Ohio Stadium. That's not true. We did win in the college football playoff. I'm Stephen, that's Stefan, and that's Andrew, and these are our game predictions. Ohio State favored by 30.5 points with an over-under of 51.5. That line is dropping. I think it opened at 33.5, 34.5. I think part of that, though, is just OU's looked pretty good the last 2 weeks, and maybe you're trying to overcorrect for that, which I understand. Andrew, you first. This is your alma mater. Are you going to go full fanboy mode and pick the school who gave you the education and made this job possible for you, provided you with the degree you now have, or are you going to betray your family?
I'm going to turn my diploma, which is right out of screen. I'm going to turn it around so that it doesn't have to hear this. Ohio State 42, Ohio 14. Ohio State is the best team in the country right now, I think. I mean, they beat the number 1 team in the country, and that rose them to number 1, no matter what.
Would you vote that way if you voted in the AP poll?
Wow, AP poll discourse on this video. I didn't expect we were going to go there. Yes, I would vote Ohio State number 1. I think they're the number 1 team in the country. I think they're the best team in the country. Look, I think Ohio is going to present some, oh, wow, look at that play. Or, wow, look at Ohio. They held Ohio State to a field goal here, or maybe they get a 3rd down stop or something like that, right? And, you go, wait a minute. And I think there might be some people who, scout the helmet and they see a MAC school. Ohio would beat Purdue. Ohio would beat UCLA, I think. And both of those teams are on Ohio State's schedule down the line. So this is not, the worst FBS team that Ohio State's going to play this year. So I think there might be some of that where people kind of maybe need to understand that Ohio is one of the better G5 teams. Still doesn't matter. I mean, Ohio State, the talent gap is just so difficult just to overcome for a team like that. I don't think Ohio's secondary is very good. I don't think it's very good in the league that they play in. I don't think it's going to be a dominant secondary in the MAC. I don't think it's a dominant secondary when you compare it to Rutgers. Because, Ethan Kaliakmanis was able to spin it a little bit against them, and he doesn't spin it against many people that in college football like that. West Virginia and their quarterback situation was just a mess. They had a bunch going on there offensively. So I don't know if you can read too much into their defense there. Ohio State is going to balloon this score, I think, in the middle 2 quarters. And I think, maybe we're in for a 7-0 first quarter or a, 14-7 first quarter that quickly turns into 28-7 at halftime, and then Ohio State just kind of cruises the rest of the way. But I do think OU covers. I do think OU covers the 30.5. I do think we go over because I think Ohio State's going to want to work on some things offensively, the running game. I think they're going to still want to see Julian Sand play some football. We were talking about this, I believe, on our the early part of the pod and then off the pod. Ohio State they play Grambling State, they play Ohio, they have a bye week, and then they're jumping right into it when they go to Seattle to play Washington. So you want these guys to play, but Ohio does cover 42-14. Buckeyes win. They go 3-0 and they'll go to the bye week.
So Gillis is the second one of us 3 who gets to watch his alma mater play Ohio State. I'll get to do it next year. That one won't be Ghost. That one will be a bit of a bloodbath. I think Stefan's going to end up with the most competitive one of the bunch, but that's because he went to a Big Ten school, and we did not. Andrew taking Ohio to cover, but taking the over as well. Stefan, what's your game score?
Yeah, I've got Ohio State winning this game 49-7. So that is the over. That's Ohio State to cover. I think it's going to be a dominant performance by Ohio State. I've spoken highly on our pod about Ohio, and I think Parker Navarro is a great quarterback. He's going to be a good test for Ohio State, going into the matchup with Washington after the bye week. But I think this Ohio State team is just too good right now. If you listen to Buckeye Talk, we just spent a lot of time talking about Ryan Day's dominance against MAC teams. I considered going into that area. I actually considered Ohio State maybe covering the over on their own and getting into the 50s. I do think Ohio State's going to put somewhat of an emphasis on improving and working on its running game. I think the passing game kind of got to, loosen up a bit against Grambling. And I think this is going to be a chance to kind of test that running game and get them right going into the bye week before Big Ten play starts. So I think that paired with an Ohio rushing attack, that's pretty good and something that they're going to lean on. I think we're going to see the clock tick a bit more than we did when Ohio State played Grambling last week. So I think that's going to lend itself to Ohio State not getting past that 50 mark. But 49-7, I think Ohio gets an early score. Like I said, I think Parker Navarro is going to make things somewhat difficult for this Ohio State defense. But in the end, Ohio State's offense is just, I think it's just too good. I think the only thing stopping it from putting up more points is the clock, frankly. So I've got Ohio State 56, Ohio 7. That's the over. Sorry, 49-7. That's the over, and Ohio State covering.
So neither one of you have them going over 50. It's been a decade since they haven't scored 50 against a MAC school, and that was against Northern Illinois in 2015. Urban Meyer was still the head coach, and they only scored 20 points and won that game 20-13. And that season, man, what a weird year for a team that was the reigning national champions. The only other time since the Urban Meyer era started that they have not scored at least 50 was in 2013 when Khalil Mack and Buffalo came to Ohio Stadium in 2013 and lost 40-20. Other than that, they've been scoring 50 plus, and Ryan Day has scored at least 52. And as I said on the podcast, go listen to that wherever you find podcasts. Ryan Day is averaging 64 points against MAC teams in his 5 previous attempts at going at this with a win margin of 56.2. So outscoring 64-7.8 against the MAC. I don't think that's going to change this year. Yes, it's new clock rules, but we've seen Ohio State against a MAC team in these new clock rules. They scored 52 and 56 last year against Akron and Western Michigan. I think this team is better, so it just means that Ohio might score a little bit more. I think you see something similar to what you've seen in the last couple of times that Day has faced the MAC score. The ones get scored on. Maybe you see a little bit of something early. You haven't really seen the late scores. I'm going to say that Ohio tags on something late. So my score is 52-10. Ohio gets 1 touchdown on the board and then a random field goal at some point in this game. But other than that, I just think Ryan Day, as I said on the podcast, Ryan Day hates the MAC. He doesn't really hate the MAC, but listen, he has a field day against the MAC conference. As I said, 64 points in his 5 other meetings. They come to play against the MAC. And I think that combination of Ryan Day has not had a down game against the MAC yet. There's a lot of guys on Ohio's roster who probably grew up wanting to be Buckeyes, and they're going to get an opportunity to play in Ohio Stadium. There is a sentimental value of all those things. Plus, Ohio State doesn't play football again for another 2 weeks, so they kind of need to keep their starters out there a little bit and let them get some chemistry and let them get some in-game real reps. Because remember, this is only Julian Sands' 3rd game as a starter, and he played 27 snaps last year. So they need to move it. They need to be aggressive. They need to play this game with a full 4-quarter mentality where maybe you see Lincoln Keenholz in the 2s near the end of things here. But that's my score, 52-10. Ohio State gets the win, covers the over on their own, and I'm taking Ohio State with the points. Those are our game scores. That's our conversation about Ohio. If you go listen to Buckeye Talk, you'll get the full hour-long conversation where we talked and covered a bunch of different things that matter in this game and that matter for the season. Get the text 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. Ohio State against the Bobcats inside Ohio Stadium at night. And they're going to try to make a helmet out of the crowd, which I think is either going to go very, very well or very, very poorly. So I guess we'll find out. We'll text it to you, 614-350-3315. 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. For Stefan, Krajisnik, and Andrew Gillis, I'm Stephen Means. We'll talk to you guys later.